Hi, I'm Colleen Crowlie, and I get to do the Halloween story time for the Copper Queen Library Annex in San Jose. I'm going to be telling a story about Halloween trick-or-treating, about a boy who goes out and gets this bubblegum that he can't get rid of. It's an old story. Steinbeck told it about a boy in Paris. Other people have told it, but this is the Bisbee version of the curse of the Black Bubblegum. There was a boy whose favorite sweet thing was bubblegum. He was a bubblegum aficionado, and whenever he went to the Circle K or Mimosa Market, he was always looking for a new kind of bubblegum. He used the Tate bubblegum, the ones that tasted like sour apple. There was even a bubblegum that looked like gold nuggets. He tried them all. And so when he would go out on Halloween trick-or-treating, he never kept the candy. The only thing he wanted was bubblegum. Well, you can imagine how much his friends liked to go trick-or-treating with him, because if he got some Reese's peanut butter cups or some M&Ms or whatever, he'd give his friends the candy. Well, at the end of the night, his friends had a bag of candy and he only had 3 pieces of bubblegum. And he thought, gosh, that's not very much. And he was walking down Tombstone Canyon when he came to an old house that nobody had lived in. But when he looked, he saw that there was a light on the porch. And he thought, oh, I wonder if that means that they're going to give stuff to trick-or-treaters. That's usually what it means when they leave the light on. So he thought, ooh, it's kind of creepy. But then he thought, I'm a 5th grader. I don't believe in ghosts. And so he decided he would go ask. But he took a picture of himself first because he wanted to show his friends that he'd gone trick-or-treating at the haunted house. And he opened up the gate. And he walked down the path. And he felt the weeds. And he stepped on the porch steps. And when he got up to the top of the steps, his face was covered in cobwebs. And he thought, ooh, maybe I don't want to do this. But then he thought, well, I'm already here, and I'll just knock and see if anybody's home. So he knocked, and he waited, and he waited, and he waited, and finally the door opened up. And there was an old man. He was so old that not only was his hair gray and his skin gray, he was gray all over. And he said, what do you want? And the kid said, well, trick or treat. And the old man goes, what's that? And he goes, well, it's on Halloween, and you go to people's houses and you say trick or treat, and if they give you a treat, you just leave them alone, and if they don't, you can play a trick on them. But you don't have to worry. I'm not going to play a trick. Ah, said the old man, I know what you want. And he went back in the house. And he was gone for a really long time. And finally he comes back on the porch and he drops something in the boy's bag. And then he closed the door. And the kid just jumped off the porch and started running. He ran all the way down Tombstone Canyon until he got to the firehouse. And when he got to the firehouse, he took that treat that the old man had given him, and he looked at it, and it was black with a white skull and crossbones on it. And he thought, ooh, too cool. And he went back home. When he got up to his house, he put his Halloween candy on the bed, and he knew right away which piece he was going to chew first. He was going to chew that black piece. So he untwisted the both ends and stuck it in his mouth. And it was the best tasting gum he had ever had. It was just sweet and tangy, and oh, the texture, a lot of gum, it's either too smushy or it's too firm. But this gum, you just could chew and chew and chew and chew, and it felt like the gum was almost chewing you. It was so easy. And he chewed for a long time, and then he thought, I wonder what kind of bubbles this gum would blow. And so he started out first, he just he blew a bubble that was as big as his head the first time. And it was so strong that if he'd had more air, he could have blown more, but he didn't. So he popped it, put the gum in his mouth, and this time he took a really big breath. And you have been practicing your breaths. So we're going to inhale as much as we can. And then he blew. He blew a bubble this big. And it was still in good shape. He popped it and put it in his mouth, and he thought, man, this is the best bubblegum I've ever had. In fact, he decided that he'd take a really deep breath. And you know how you take a really deep breath? Is you lean over. And he leaned over, and he took a lot of air in, and then he blew it out. It was the biggest bubble he'd ever seen. He'd blown the biggest bubble probably ever in the world. My God, it was the best bubble gum ever. And he just popped it, and then his mom called upstairs, and she said, it's time to go to bed. And he thought, oh, okay, well, what should he do? His mom had a rule that he couldn't leave the bubble gum, it was out of his mouth. It had to be in the garbage. She'd had some problems. She'd gotten, a coat got wrecked with some gum and whatever. Anyway, but he decided this gum was so good that he was going to save it. And you can't just save it in your mouth because it's going to fall out and get in your hair. So he thought, well, he was going to save the gum. So he just put it by the side of his bed on the table. And, how much harm could that be? So he did that, and he fell asleep. And he was asleep for, 45 minutes, almost an hour, when he woke up. And he was chewing that gum again. And he thought, wow, how did that gum get in my mouth? And he was chewing, and he thought, oh, I got to get rid of this gum. But when he'd put his finger in his mouth, it would kind of just like move around, and he couldn't get a hold of it. And finally he had to just bite down really hard and took it out of his teeth, and he thought, I think I'm just going to throw this gum away. And he threw it in the garbage, and he went back to sleep, and it was about an hour later when he woke up, and that gum was in his mouth. And he was just chewing. He couldn't stop. He couldn't stop. He was chewing. He couldn't even call to his mom because he was so busy chewing the gum, and he didn't know what to do. And finally, he just chomped down again really hard. And this time it was wiggling around, and he was taking a while to get all that gum out of his mouth. And he thought, oh no, what am I gonna do? So he threw the gum in the garbage again, but he didn't turn out the light this time. And he was sitting in his bed, and he looked down, and he saw that gum was coming up out of the garbage can. And it was going down. And then it was coming up on the bed. And then it was going across the bed. And he got up on his pajamas, and he just grabbed it really quick. And he took it. And he goes, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then he thought, well, I'm just going to throw it away outside. So he ran over to the bedroom window, and he opened it up, and he threw it as far as he could. And he slammed that window shut, and he locked it. And he looked around the room, and he realized that his bedroom door had a big crack underneath it, and he went and got some dirty clothes, and he stuffed it under the crack so the gum couldn't get in again. Well, when he got up in the morning, wow, he thought, that was the worst nightmare I have ever had. I don't think I'm ever going to chew gum again. And he took the gum off the dresser, and he just threw it in the garbage. And he went downstairs, and his mom was making pancakes, and she said, what do you want? Do you want syrup or peanut butter? And he said, I don't care. And she goes, what's the matter? And he goes, oh. And then she looked over, and she saw the gum crawling in the back door. And she looked down, and she says, what's that? And he said, bubblegum. And she goes, bubblegum? How could bubblegum crawl across the floor? He goes, I don't know. She goes, what? You don't know? Where'd you get that gum? And it started crawling up the leg of his pants. And then it started crawling up on his shirt. And he started screaming, get it off from me! Get it off from me! And his mom came with a jar, and she just scooped that gum up, and she twisted the lid on. And then the gum fell down to the bottom, and he thought, oh, good, it's dead. But no, it started going around and around and around to the lid, trying to get out. His mom looked at it and said, well, I don't know where you got this gum, but I'm telling you, you better get rid of it. The bus is going to be here any minute now, so you just come home. When you get home from school, you take care of this. And she put it on the counter. Well, when he got to school, all he could think about was bubblegum. I mean, the teacher would be like, what's 87 times 453? And all he could think about was 87 pieces of bubblegum times 453. Or if they talked about history, he'd just wonder when was this bubblegum invented? He thought about it all day long. He tried to figure out what he was going to do with that gum. Because, you know, when you live in old Bisbee, you can't just dig a hole. Because that's what he thought. Oh, you just dig a hole and bury it. But no, it's a rock mountain. So it's too hard to dig a hole. In the old days, they used to use dynamite to dig the holes. So he wouldn't be able to do that. And then he looked across the street, and there was the Evergreen Cemetery. And he thought, well, maybe if he couldn't figure something else out, he could go and put it in one of the cracks in the grave. But he didn't know. He didn't know what to do. When he got home, there was the gum, just laying at the bottom of the jar on the counter. And he thought this time, oh, okay, now it's really dead. And as soon as that gum heard him, it started crawling around the inside of the jar again. And it crawled clear to the top of the jar again. And this one time it went and gave him a big old bubblegum kiss. And he thought, oh no, what am I going to do with this gum? And he started walking down, until he walked clear down to the lavender pit. Now, the lavender pit is the deepest, steepest mining pit in the American West. It's deep. And he thought, well, maybe he could just throw that gum down there, and it would probably take 20 years for it to climb back out. But then he realized that it was going to take a lot stronger person than him to throw that gum even just past that first tier. And the more he looked at it, the more he thought, oh yeah, I'll probably just throw the gum and it'll break and it'll be home before I get home. So he decided not to do the lavender pit. He decided to go to Greenway Cemetery. And he went and he started looking for the grave. He'd seen a grave when he was in, well, his history class went there to look at some of the pioneer graves, and there was one with a really big crack in it. And he thought, oh, I'll just go and I'll shove that jar in that crack. But he couldn't find the grave, and he couldn't find the grave, and he couldn't find the grave. And finally, he found a grave that had kind of a littler crack, not a crack big enough for the jar, and it meant that he had to stick his hand in the jar and take the gum out. But it was getting dark, and it was really windy, and he didn't know what else to do. So he opened up the jar, and he stuck his hand in there, and it started crawling up on his hand, and he just grabbed it as good as he could, and he pulled it out of the jar. And then he thought, oh God, what am I? And he stuffed it in that crack. And then he went and he got some big rocks, and he covered the crack. And he never did see that gum again. But I just wanted to tell you this story because somebody might try and give you some black bubble gum someday. And I just want to warn you, don't chew it, because it's alive. The end. Thank you for joining us for the story time at the Copper Queen Library Annex. If you enjoyed the video, like it and subscribe for more content. See you.